Welcome to The Exchange. I'm Rob Cox. My guest today is Janet Reitman, a contributing editor at Rolling Stone and the author of a recent polemical piece called Confessions of an Ivy League Frat Boy Inside Dartmouth's Hazing Abuses. Janet, welcome to the show. I read this article with a lot of enthusiasm and a little bit of disgust as you talked about some of the practices at Dartmouth's, fabled fraternities. This takes on a lot of currency now that we have in the next week. Dr. Jim Kim will be, of course, running for the presidency of the World Bank. And during the 3 years that he was at Dartmouth, one of the things, the charges you made, or we talk about, is that he didn't really do much to curb this culture of excess. But how is this going to play out with the World Bank?
Well, I mean, Jim Kim, who is a renowned public health expert, a co-founder of Partners in Health, which is one of the great, in my view, one of the great American NGOs, and sort of an underappreciated but great NGO.
Right. Trying to eradicate tuberculosis,
trying to eradicate,
like
TB, and they're interestingly enough, they use a very localized approach. They're not, a sort of an organization that has 50,000 white people that flood, into these various countries. He comes to a school like Dartmouth and he makes a decision to not change the culture, and he says that very directly, actually, at a meeting with alumni, that he is not there to change their culture, which goes over very well with Dartmouth's alumni, who have always supported the fraternity system, as they support sort of all of Dartmouth's traditions, which people actually refer to with a capital T. I mean, this is a school, unlike any other Ivy League school that I've know of, where the tradition of honestly, of fraternities and of drinking and of a sort of
debauched culture.
Yeah,
what it feels. I mean,
it's very debauched.
You've written quite a bit about some of the debauchery. I mean, let's some of our viewers may need to brace themselves for this, but you talk about some of the traditions which are.
One of my favorites is called Boot and Rally, which is drinking.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Right. For those that may not know this.
Boot and rally.
Drinking until you need to throw up.
Right.
And then drinking some more. And it's something practiced by both men and women, and it's campus sort of and for those who do engage in the social culture of the school, it's kind of campus-wide. And there's a big emphasis on hard drinking of beer.
And this is, of course, the university, the college on which Animal House was
right.
partly based. But it is also, of course, an Ivy League school that has churned out some of the great business leaders of the world. I mean, you have Jeff Immelt, the CEO of General Electric. You have Hank Paulson, famously, who was the Treasury Secretary and head of Goldman Sachs. Tim Geithner, who's our current Treasury Secretary. There is a sort of question then, how do they feel about this notion that the culture of Dartmouth is debauched?
Tim Geithner was not in a fraternity, and Hank Paulson was in a fraternity, and he actually was in the same fraternity that Andrew Lowes, who's the main character in my story, also belonged to SAE. But Paulson was not a particularly active member. He was referred to in his day as what they called him the ghost. He was like never there, apparently. And he's a Christian Scientist. I mean, I don't think he really engaged in that part of the culture. Jeff Immelt was a member of a fraternity called Phi Delta, has been very involved in the Alumni Association, he's on the Board of Trustees. From my understanding from the reporting I did, he's been very involved in his fraternity, given money to his fraternity. I think he's pretty much on board with.
So he'll be sensitive. I mean, I imagine alumni will be sensitive to charges that the place has gone sort of over the top.
To be fair to the alumni, I know that, from the kids that I interviewed, they're never honest with the alumni. They don't actually tell their alumni, their trustees and their advisors what they're doing. Yeah. I mean, I think that some of these alumni would probably are shocked or would be shocked by some of this stuff, but it's not brought to their attention.
I think it takes on this extra relevance with Dr. Kim going to the World Bank, which is, and certainly he is a health practitioner and a physician. Has there been an effort, though, in anywhere to try to sort of reduce this problem?
There was movement in the early 2000s by Kim's predecessor, and it was met by such profound resistance from both students and alumni that the initiative was basically softened. It became something called the Student Life Initiative. It was softened. It did make some changes to the system, but the big change that Jim Wright, Kim's predecessor, had wanted to make was to ultimately make these fraternities go co-ed, which is what a number of other small liberal arts colleges that would be sort of peer institutions to Dartmouth had done. And that was absolutely not going to happen. Since then, the only changes that have gone on is that Kim has started a binge drinking initiative. It's called it's a commission on binge drinking, and it's an intercollegiate commission. And their goal is to sort of study the issue of binge drinking, to come up with a lot of data, and then do. And my question is, and do what with it? Because it's this very technocratic, approach that I don't see. I mean, I've said this to other people. I've never seen that work in the field of international development, where it's used all the time as kind of study approach. I don't see where this is going to work on college campuses to curb binge drinking, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to study the issue of hazing or study the issue of binge drinking, but they're not actually trying to make a step, any kind of concrete step to, halt some of these practices.
But, well, I mean, if he found it hard to deal with Dartmouth's culture, it's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with 187 different constituencies and shareholders at the World Bank. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on, Janet. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
My guest today on The Exchange was Janet Reitman, who is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone. I'm Rob Cox, and we'll be back next week with another episode of The Exchange.